Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kardec Radio. Today, the show is about Dr. Carl Wickland's book, 30 Years Among the Dead. Most fascinating, a wonderful psychiatrist from the past century. He was a member of the Chicago Medical Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the chief psychiatrist at the National Psychopathic Institute of Chicago. He specialized in cases of schizophrenia, paranoia, depression, addiction, maniac depression, criminal behavior, and other phobias. And when he moved to Los Angeles in 1918, he founded the National Psychological Institute of Los Angeles with his wife, Anna Wickland, who was a trance medium. And you will see through this program his beautiful accounts on how spirit attachment, which we call in spiritism obsession, can shift people's lives, if they are bad, to the worse, and creating mental disorders, pseudo illnesses, and many problems. And he's going to tell us how he treated the patients and much more. And to help us understand a little more about this important and most urgent need in the world today, and especially in the United States, it's about the mental health care and the need of bridging up spirituality into it to be more effective. Something that Brazil is far ahead. Brazil has a beautiful partnership between the mental health system in general with spiritist practitioners, spiritist organizations, taking care of mental health care from a whole different angle to be more effective. There is what we call the spiritual factor, the spirit element that plays a role in our daily lives, and we need to address it. And to help us understand more about how we can really make it more effective, we have here with us a friend and an expert in the field of mental health care, Dr. Ona Graham. She is talking to us from Columbus, Georgia. She is a clinical neuropsychologist. She has been working on neuropsychology for 25 years, and for the last 15 years, she has been working extensively in clinical practice in psychology. So she has a lot to share with us, a lot to talk to us about the ins and outs of mental health care treatment and the spiritual element that appears in these occasions, and what do we do? So we have a lot to share with you. It's going to be fascinating, something really that is, I tell you, intriguing. And whatever you are, send us your questions or comments at the chat room of Blog Talk Radio. We are here at Blog Talk Radio /Kardec Radio, and open for you, for your questions, for your comments, or you can do as often, send by email. And if you don't want your name disclosed, just let me know, and that's going to be fine as long as you share your ideas. If you want to call live, we're here at 858-769-4705. But if you were listening to us there and it's past the live show, if you call this number, it's not going to work because it's only working during the live shows. If you want to call us to ask any question, you can call 410-382-5328 at after show hours, and we'll be here to answer to your questions. And people who have been sending us comments, we thank you very much. You know, it's fascinating. Kardec Radio is much more than 61 countries in the world today. We've been having at shows 30,000, 60,000 people in special shows, and we tell you, we're so grateful to you for your comments, for your suggestions, for your enthusiasm, because we know this is a work of the divinity, work of the spirits, and they are allowing us to spread the good news that there's so much happening out there to let people live happier and with true wellness. Remember also, there is also Bezerra Online Web Radio, which is a sister radio in 3 languages, Portuguese, Spanish, and in English, and they retransmit Kardec Radio at least 3 times a day. You can access their website at spiritist.com. By the way, next program is going to be about spiritual surgeries, spiritual doctors in Brazil. It's about the spiritual healing techniques in several spiritist centers, and it was a beautiful book compiled by Sandra Nunes in California. She's going to be here with us. We have beautiful programs in February. Very soon, in the next day or 2, we're going to release it to you at kardecradio.com, so you enjoy and rejoice the good news. The good people are doing great works out there. By the way, if you want to receive good news every day in your life, we recommend to you, just go to goodnewsnetwork.com. There you will find many wonderful news that are happening around the world. It's what we call compassionate journalism. It's this wonderful mind that created, a former journalist, she created this beautiful website, Good News Network, to prove a point that good news can also sell. And they do, because she has been working on this for the last 10, 15 years. And probably very soon she's going to be at Kardec Radio telling us more about the beautiful work she's doing, sharing the good news, because the world is really shifting to the better, believe it or not. For now, dear listener, in this program today, the plan is to discuss the ins and outs of Dr. Carl Wickland's work, together with his wife, Anne Wickland, in the book 30 Years Among the Dead. We have a friend, Dr. Ona Graham, who is here with us, a clinical neuropsychologist, who will chat with us about the ins and outs of mental health care when we observe the influence of spiritual influences, entities, spirit attachment, etc. In the program also, you're going to have beautiful segments, a new segment that we're launching today, and every show you're going to have a new chapter. It's that book, Happy Life, by Joana de Angelis, through the mediumship of Divaldo Franco. Today we're going to stream to you at the very beginning of the program the beautiful preface of the book about Dr. Zab and his wisdom. Throughout the show, we're going to discuss also a case on the afterlife by the book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec, and later, segments on coping, spiritism, and reincarnation by Dr. Magalhães and Joyce Magalhães. Also, the segment Gospel and Spiritism by Luis Sergio Maroda, followed by Kirsten DeMello, Law of Preservation, Imaginary Needs in the Spirits book, and the beautiful segment also on the Spirits book by Allan Kardec, questions 10 to 15, put together by our dear friends John DeRosa and Steve Shepard. At the very end, we're going to wrap up with the most famous prayer, our prayer collective moment, pray together to strengthen ourselves, which is actually going to be followed by the song Our Father by the dear friend James Maroda. So let us listen to the beautiful preface of the book Happy Life, and followed by the break, we have here the discussion on the very 30 Years Among the Dead book.
In the ancient Persian city of Ecbatana, there was an academy where the wise men of the age met. It was called the Silent Academy, since its members solved the problems presented to them in silent meditation. One day, when all the members were meeting, the eminent thinker, Dr. Zeb, appeared in order to present his candidacy for one of the disputed places. The Academy president waited in silence, and then before the other Academy members, wrote the number 1000 in chalk on the blackboard. He placed a 0 to the left of it to show Zeb that this was his importance to those present. Dr. Zeb, unruffled, erased the 0 and moved it to the right of the number, increasing its value tenfold. Surprised, the wise men took a crystal chalice and filled it with water in such a way that any additional drop would result in the loss of another drop. Without missing a beat, the candidate removed a petal of the beautiful rose that adorned the hall and placed it on the water in the glass, where it remained and became even more beautiful. Dr. Zeb's excellent response earned him membership in the Guild of the Wise. Considering the appreciable number of works dealing with rules of behavior, moral and evangelical orientation, another small book might easily appear to be yet another 0 to the left of a more significant figure. But bearing in mind the number of minds and hearts seeking guidance and help, inspiration and spiritual support, we have decided to bring together 200 well-known topics. Simply treated and easily applied, we present them as a gift to our readers, asking Jesus' blessing on all of us. We hope that in its simplicity, this collection may become the rose petal placed by Dr. Zeb in the liquid-filled glass, giving meaning, beauty, and life to the existence of all those who read it. Joana de Angelis, Salvador, February 20th, 1988.
We will return to our program after these messages.
A new masterpiece has just been released by Odyssey of America, Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne Pereira, under the guidance of the Spirit Leon Dennis. The Spirit author, Camilo Castelo Branco, using the pen name Camilo Cândido Botelho, describes to the medium Yvonne A. Pereira his dreadful experience after discarnated by suicide. The book entails invaluable instruction demonstrating the greatness of the divine mercy toward repentant suicides and providing them with the opportunity to understand the universe and life in its fullest dimension, the beginnings of planet Earth, the evolution of the human being, the immortality of the soul. Christ-conscious morality and other relevant themes are presented for the understanding that no attempt at moral growth will work if we remain imprisoned in self-ignorance. A completing of this work shows that there is a road of reconstruction for those who repent. There is always hope because rehabilitation is possible. Buy your copy today at www.odysseyofamerica.com.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are here to talk about mental health care and the importance of considering an urgent issue, the spirit element. Because no doubt we have many accounts from different perspectives, from the Spiritist movement to scientists like Dr. Carl Wicklund and others, especially William James in the past, talking about how people can suffer from spirit attachment and really go through a mental imbalance. And nothing has been done effectively to date in that regard. And many people are suffering due to that. If we take a look at the statistics of the National Institute of Mental Health, in the United States alone, in a survey that was done in 2008, only 13.5% of adults in the United States received treatment for mental health problem. Of course, we're not saying, oh, everybody's crazy and they should go to a mental treatment, but we're saying, sometimes people really don't get to receive the treatment because they are not fully aware of the efficacy or the possibilities that are laying out there. The other thing that they also disclose in their statistics is that 58.7% of adults in the United States with a serious mental illness received treatment from mental health problem. So they are funneling these statistics, telling us that amongst those who received a problem, actually, majority of them were outpatients and received prescription drugs. And basically, that's it. Nowadays, very little is done in mental health care in major hospitals. It's mostly about prescription drugs. And amongst those who have mental disorders, they say they found in 2008 that 71% of adults who had major depression used mental health services and treatment to help with their disorder in general. And amongst those who have depression, over 50 were more likely to be women than men to receive treatment. It's quite interesting because still it is considered a taboo for many people out there, unfortunately, and we need to talk more about it to make sure that it becomes second nature. Mental health is as important as any other thing. I would say even more important than everything else in ourselves. And people don't know sometimes what to do when we're experiencing unsettling emotions. Dr. Carl Wickland, as a psychiatrist, observed many of these features. He was, just for those who are not aware who he was a Swedish psychiatrist. He was born in 1861 in Sweden and then moved to the United States. He was a member of the Chicago Medical Society, the American Association for Advancement of Science, and the chief psychiatrist at the National Psychopathic Institute of Chicago. He specialized in cases of schizophrenia, paranoia, depression, addiction, maniac depression, criminal behavior, and other phobias. Then he moved to Los Angeles with his wife, Anna Wickland, where he founded in 1918 the National Psychological Institute of Los Angeles. There he treated many patients suffering from mental illness of all kinds, and after many years of experience, he came to the conclusion that a number of his patients he treated had spirit attachments. As he used to say, spirit obsession is a fact, a perversion of natural law, and is amply demonstrable. This has been proven hundreds of times by causing the supposed insanity or aberration to be temporarily transferred from the victim to a medium who is trained for the purpose, and by this method ascertain the cause of the psychosis to be an ignorant or mischievous spirit whose identity may frequently be verified. Much like Allan Kardec, but into the mental health care system. He was dialoguing with the spirits. He was into the spirit psychotherapy, if we may say this way, and he disclosed many of these conversations in his book, 30 Years Among the Dead. He was a brave mind and a very courageous heart, because at the time it was quite tricky for somebody with his reputation to publish these findings as he did. And we have a lot to learn with him. And not only that, to learn more with Dr. Ona Graham, who is here with us directly from Columbus, Georgia. She has been working in the field of clinical psychology for more than 15 years, and she has been a clinical neuropsychologist for over 24 years with extensive experience, also sharing her sympathy with the teachings of Spiritism and the understanding that probably we need to discuss this issue much more than we imagine. Thank you so much, Ona, for being here with us at Kardec Radio today.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
So, Ona, it's funny because this issue is still a taboo today, but have you observed in your practice that some patients may come already feeling that what's happening to them doesn't come from them?
This has been happening more and more frequently. People have been introduced to the idea of spirits through media, movies and such, so they're more open to the idea. And I often now have people coming in saying they've been visited or they've seen spirits, and they have a lot of questions about what this all means to them. Many are frightened. Some are not, because the visits they get are from family members who've passed. Many people have begun to express experiences that they've had over the years but have been afraid to talk about.
It's still very challenging for them to recognize, but do you have a hypothesis why it has become more frequent in the current times?
I think there's an influence of the spirit world on the current consciousness of people, and making it is it kind of coming through in so many different medias, through what people are reading, through the media, especially with the kinds of movies and television programs that address these issues. Unfortunately, they're still more geared toward Hollywood and making money. So they don't address the higher level spiritual concerns and moral issues, which seem to escape many people nowadays.
Exactly. And it's funny because Dr. Wiklund, he made one of these observations. He said once he was teaching his students in an anatomy class, and I'll quote from his very account in his book, when he started observing that the entities can actually, transfer, as he says, their minds through the medium. He called them intermediary, and that's when he started observing this influence, as you said, of the spirits onto the physical realm. He knew his wife was already sensitive, somewhat a psychic, as he said. And he says, quoting from the book, it's actually page 13, "One day I left home without any intention of immediately beginning my first dissecting work in the anatomy class. Therefore, my wife's subconscious mind could not possibly have taken any part in what transpired later. The students were required to dissect a lateral half of a body. The first subject was a man about 60 years of age, and that afternoon I began dissecting on a lower limb. I returned home at about 5 o'clock and had scarcely entered the door when my wife was apparently taken with a sudden illness and, complaining of feeling strange, staggered as though about to fall. As I placed my hand on her shoulder, she drew herself up and became entranced by a foreign intelligence who said with threatening gesture, 'What do you mean by cutting me?' I answered that I was not aware of cutting anyone, but the spirit angrily replied, 'Of course you are. You're cutting on my leg.' Realizing that the spirit owner of the body on which I had been operating had followed me home, I began to parley with him, first placing my wife in a chair. To this, the spirit vigorously objected, saying that I had no business to touch him. To my answer that I had a right to touch my own wife, the entity retorted, 'Your wife? What are you talking about? I am no woman. I'm a man.' I explained that he passed out of his physical body and was controlling the body of my wife, and that his spirit was here and his body at the college. When he finally seemed to realize this, I said, 'Suppose I were now cutting on your body at the college. They could not kill you since yourself are here.' The spirit admitted that this seemed reasonable and said, 'I guess I must be what they call dead. so I won't have any more use of my old body. If you can learn anything by cutting on it, go ahead and cut away. I mean, it's funny. I mean, the end of the story, that he realizes it and is quite easygoing after some time of conversation on it, but sometimes the case is not that straightforward. Have you ever experienced in the clinical practice cases in which you observe the spirit element and it becomes a little complicated, like obsessors? It becomes a little complicated to address the issues of the client, especially when the client is not aware of the presence of spirits influencing their lives.
Oh, yes, I've had these experiences more and more so lately. I can share with you one story if you'd like.
Please.
I've been working with this family for several years. They'd been in and out of treatment, not tremendously committed, but they kept coming back. They had a very troubled young boy who, when I first met him, was about 7 years old. And, of course, after an evaluation, I sent him for psychiatric services, and we worked closely with a psychiatrist and the family to try and figure out what was going on with this child. He'd have periods of doing better on medications, and then they'd stop working, and we'd adjust the medication, he'd do better. And when he was doing well, the parents didn't bring him in for treatment, but, of course, when he started to deteriorate again, the parents would come back. And it had reached the point where he was becoming violent. He would pick up knives and attack furniture. Parents were afraid that he would hurt someone in the neighborhood or hurt their other children. He'd been hospitalized several times after these episodes, and they just seemed to be getting worse and worse and worse. And I was beginning to consider a diagnosis of childhood schizophrenia, which is very unusual to diagnose nowadays, when I was sitting with a mother in my office, and I heard a knock at the front door. Went to the front door, and there was no one there. I came back and sat down, and we discussed the fact that someone had knocked, everyone had heard it. And then the little boy said, well, he said, I have a imaginary friend that, and he told me his name, and he started talking about this, and this imaginary friend of his had been in his life for about the length of the time he had been manifesting the mental illness. And so we explored this a little bit. I brought the father in and talked with the father and the mother. And then I realized that this is what, outside of my scope as a practicing psychologist. And I turned to my friends in the Spiritist Center in Atlanta, and we arranged a disobsession process for this child. And over the course probably of about 6 weeks, the spirit had started to come of his own free will to the Spiritist Center. And during this time, the child began to feel some relief. He had described the spirit as kind of bullying him. And one of the things I noticed with this child, too, is as his condition got worse, is he'd go into trance states. And he had been talking incessantly at home in his room to this spirit, and they had bonded quite a great deal. So I worked with the child and his family to create more of a positive atmosphere at home, because there was nothing but fighting and arguing going on in that household, which had gotten so severe that the mother wanted to run away and the father wanted to not beat the child in submission, but break his spirit was his goal. Wow. So getting them back on the right track, getting them to begin to consider more spiritual interventions such as prayer and developing their own spiritual life, and teaching them how to protect this child from these negative spiritual influences was very important through prayer. And they were responsive to this. And then over about a 2-month period, the little boy reported to me that the spirit was gone. And And apparently there were other spirits there in the home as well, and this spirit had told the people at the Spiritist Center about it, and he decided his job was going to be convincing them to leave too, which I believe he was successful in doing, since there's now peace in the home. And this child who was so terribly disturbed has returned to a very sweet and loving child who's well-behaved, who is showing affection towards his mother and father, and it's just been a total transformation, which cannot be explained by a change in medication, since we've tried everything over the last few years. So the goal now is to teach this family to understand the needs of their son, his sensitivity to spirit influence, and their sensitivity to it as well. And they've begun to talk about their own experiences, which they have suppressed. And we're working on a plan for their spiritual healing and a path for them to lead their child along in terms of his moral and spiritual development, which is something that they had totally gotten off track. And what is very interesting also is the grandfather of this child, who had recently passed away, had started visiting him during this crisis as a positive factor and healing factor in the home, and had been visiting the father in his dreams, trying to comfort and counsel him. So this was quite a eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, that's it, and it's very tricky, right? Because the fact that spirit entities are around, they really sometimes they complicate a lot the treatment. Because Kardec says in the chapter 23 of the Medium's book, when he addresses obsession and the features, the dynamics, the ins and outs, the main thing he says is, from the observations, is treating obsession is complex because the spirits who are obsessing, they don't want the patient to receive help. And sometimes, as Dr. Wickland also made this observation, they turn against the person who tries to help them.
That's correct.
Right? So in this case, you observe that some forms of difficulties that would be probably related to impediments by the very spirit obsessors? Yes,
the one spirit this child was most familiar with that he referred to is Jacob. Jacob would not come to my office. He would stay away from anything spiritual, but for some reason he was not able to resist when he was evoked by the Spiritist group, and he did make contact with them. And I think it's the fact of having a group of supportive people who do this type of spiritual healing resulted in a faster remedy. You know, I certainly, by myself, cannot and will not try and address these matters, because it takes a community of loving people to heal someone. Not just one person who thinks they know what they're doing, because this is so much larger than even the field of psychology or neuropsychology. It goes far, far beyond our sciences and our awarenesses.
That's so true, and it's probably something that needs to be brought to light very soon. Dr. Wickland, in another chapter of his book, he addresses the fact that many of these problems, the mental problems, are not subconscious mind or multiple personalities, not even in the mediums who display some features like his wife. His wife was quite a medium, and he was quite a man to observe the fluctuation of her mood and the distresses she experienced, and he became a spirit psychotherapist. We have a previous show at the beginning of the year when Adriano Barbo, the president of the Mount Vernon Spiritist Center in New York, helped us understand a little more about this feature in this obsession meeting, or what people call rescue work. And Dr. Wickland mentions that the fact that the transfer of this psychosis from a patient to a medium really indicates that it's beyond the consciousness of the person, and it's not probably the person per se, but an entity. And then he tells an account briefly about one summer, he says, we were called to the home of a lady named Mrs. M., who was a lady of culture and refinement. She was a musician of high rank, and when she was, in high stress because of the social demands, she started suffering from a nervous breakdown. She had become intractable and for weeks had been in such a raving condition that her physicians had been unable to relieve her. Day and night, nurses were in constant attendance. And then he says, my wife and I found the patient sitting up in her bed, crying 1 minute like a forlorn child, and again screaming in fear, Matilda, Matilda. Then suddenly fighting and struggling. She would talk a wild gibberish of English and Spanish. Mrs. Wickland immediately gave her psychic diagnosis, saying that the case was unquestionably one of obsession, and this was unexpectedly confirmed when Mrs. Wickland, who was standing at the foot of the bed with wraps on ready to leave, was found to be suddenly entranced. We placed her on a davenport in the music room, where for 2 hours I talked in turn with several spirits who had just been attracted from the patient. 3 were 3 spirits, a girl named Mary, her suitor, an American, and his Mexican rival, Matilda. Both of the men had strongly loved the girl and as fiercely hated each other. In a jealous rage, one had killed the girl, and then in a desperate fight, the 2 rivals had killed each other. This tragedy of love, hatred, and jealousy had not ended with physical death. The group had unconsciously been drawn into the psychic atmosphere of the patient, and the violent fighting had continued within her aura. Since her nervous resistance was exceedingly low at this time, one after the other had usurped her physical body with a resulting disturbance that was unexplainable by her attendants. So here, is a case of strong obsession and how susceptible people may become to these forms of spirit attachment. In your observation, would you also be able to classify the types of susceptibility to forms of spirit attachment or obsession?
Well, you mentioned before how important mental health is. And from my readings in Spiritism, I've really come to understand the power of thought, and that where we direct our thoughts has a great deal to do with what we draw towards us. And people that are caught up in negativity and obsessive behaviors, which in many ways in our culture are encouraged, and spend so much of their time dealing with things that just are unhealthy. For example, a lot of these violent video games, I think, tend to engage young adults, children, in real negative thinking, and draws to them the type of spirit that might be involved or in one of their lives involved in those types of activities, enhancing the experience and pushing forward the obsession even more. Mm-hmm. I've had so many people who just want to be victims. They come in seeking help, but they see themselves as victims and they don't want to take responsibility for their own behaviors. Mm-hmm. And I think that many of the people wandering the earth, again, are trapped in their own self-delusion that they've had things done to them that they have no responsibility, that they don't have to change. And mm-hmm. so I think they draw around themselves many of these patients that come to see me, this idea and this reinforcement that they are not the problem, or they can't fix it. And they're out of touch, especially with issues of resentment and anger and bitterness, that tends to close the door to any spiritual awareness. I can think of one lovely lady who is not a patient of mine, but an elderly lady who is a professor who, up until recently, being part of one of my prayer groups, felt that God wasn't talking to her, but in actuality she was harboring tremendous anger and bitterness towards her ex-husband. And as she began to release that and reach out to God, she says, "Oh, God's suddenly talking to me again." And it's actually the opposite. Is she's suddenly reaching up and opening herself up to something other than her bitterness. And a lot of the work I do is to try and get people to recognize that they have a choice. They can choose to go negative or positive, and it has a major consequence. So many people feel helpless, and they've given up the idea that they have free will, which is one of the greatest gifts that our Creator has given us.
You're so right, Ona. It's beautifully summarized. And as you said, if we don't watch out for the mental frequency that we're tuning in, we're going to be connecting to lower spirits. As Dr. Wickland in Chapter 4 mentions about Earth sphere conditions and the magnetic aura, he says, unenlightened spirits often wander aimlessly for many years in the Earth sphere. They lack of knowledge of a higher spirit world, which is attained only through understanding, keeping them in a dreary condition of confusion, monotony, and suffering. They also can connect to people who are feeling just alike, and that is trouble for not only the person, but the people who live with the person. We're going to give a short break. When we come back, we're going to discuss a case by Allan Kardec named Bernardin, when he talks about one of the fundamental tenets of how to face diseases and problems with calm and resignation, not to go into madness. We'll be right back.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
And Life Goes On, in an inspiring novel by the spirit author André Luiz. This book is a spirit's description of the individual after discarnating, and it shows that the lives of the inhabitants of the beyond are related to their mental state. In a novel with 26 chapters, it tells the story of real characters who, upon discarnating, receive the help of spirit friends. These friends encourage them to renew themselves through study and work in order to prepare them to review their lives and understand schemes of the past, thereby enabling them to follow new directives of behavior. This volume teaches us the practice of self-examination in a certainty that, in conformity with the laws of God, life continues full of hope and labor, progress and accomplishment after death. Buy your copy today at www.edisayofamerica.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Spiritism for Everyone, the online study of the Spirit's Book and the Gospel according to Spiritism. Spiritism for Everyone meets every Wednesday evening and Saturday morning using the latest technology in web conferencing. You can join in from any computer in the comfort of your home or office, no matter where you are in the U.S. or the world. Spiritism for Everyone is open, free, and requires no registration. To access the web live meetings, go to www.spiritus.us. Spiritism for Everyone is a program of the United States Spiritist Council.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are here talking to Dr. Ona Graham, who has been a clinical nurse psychologist for 25 years and working in the clinical practice of psychology for the last 15 years. She's located in Columbus, Georgia, and she has been in touch with the Spiritist teachings and the understanding that there is greater need of addressing many issues in mental health care beyond prescription drugs, sometimes beyond cognitive therapy or other forms of psychotherapy, but with spiritual therapy. So, Ona, we are here talking about tormenting spirits and the possibility of creating lots of disturbances. As Dr. Wickland said in his book, Chapter 5, he talks about this very issue, and he says that obsessing spirits can torment and create sometimes lots of violence at home. And he talks about people who had problems in their own home, in their marriages, due to tormenting spirits. Sometimes people have no idea that this may be one of the reasons why they experience a lot of setbacks in their family lives. Is this something that is very frequent also in the clinical practice, in your clinical practice?
Well, I would have to say yes, but that's a retrospective awareness. As I've reviewed some of my cases in my mind of people who were not able to really discuss the spiritual aspect of what they were going through, and I was not as perceptive as I am today. But, I know of one situation where this gentleman had addiction issues and had an obsessing spirit, which he wasn't aware of, but he knew he had very strong mediumistic tendencies. But the obsessing spirit had been a murderer, had during his life had murdered his wife and her boyfriend. He had come home from work and found them sleeping together and had taken an axe and had killed them. And then his parents had whisked him away from Italy through the help of the mafia, where he came to the United States and married this man's mother when he was 10. And he was a violent and brutal man, and he had taken this 10-year-old on a hit with him, and this young man had total amnesia about the event afterwards. He repressed it completely for many, many years, but this spirit apparently had followed him and had tormented him and his mother and his sisters at various points when he was able to get the strength to do that, I assume from other negative spirits living in various homes that they lived in. But this was absolutely disruptive to this family. And after several failed marriages, over time he became aware of what was happening and sought some help. And was able to forgive this man who he had actually hated, and I believe his hatred had maintained this bond with this negative entity. And but what is interesting in all the years that they had spent together, because he struggled so hard to be good and to have a good life, that he actually influenced this spirit in a positive way. And he was finally ready to let go with some help, and did release him and moved on to whatever fate was being prepared for him. But the gentleman involved has, for the first time in his life that he can remember, after 40 years of being tormented by this spirit, has finally gotten a sense of peace and is healing physically as well as emotionally and spiritually. So,
wow, that's a story.
Another example of how long the battle can be and how difficult it is. But nevertheless, there's a lot of learning that occurs in the process. And the important thing is to learn to forgive and to love, because these tormenting spirits are God's children as well, and they need our prayers and they need our love in order for them to heal. So we all heal together. We don't make progress all by ourselves. We all have to grow closer to God together.
Yeah, that is certainly a true thing. Many people think that doing like spirit release therapy or disobsession meetings is simply about telling the entities like, oh, go away, go to the light, etc. And really, it's not how it works, because they are human beings just like we are, because though our bodies are gone, we are who we are. Just like Dr. Wickland said in Chapter 6 when he talks about spirits and crime, as you're saying this, I remember one of the quotes from the book when he says, habits, desires, and inclinations are rooted in the mind and remain with the individual after he is freed from his physical body until they are eliminated by the will. So the spirits of criminals, he says, murderers, those who were executed or are seeking for revenge, remain indefinitely in their spirit, often endeavor to continue their former activities and to carry out their evil designs through controlling the bodies of mortals who are sensitive to their influence. So talking about many crimes being pushed by spirit entities who are still attuned with that mindset. And we have a special article put together by Luis Salazar in the previous issue of the last issue of the Spiritist magazine, which was released the end of the year, beginning of January, when he talks about gangs and the fact that many spirits in the afterlife can feed into these gangs, and as you were talking about the case of the mafia, etc., etc. So, Ona, we're going to listen to a 3-minute case brought in by Allan Kardec from the book Heaven and Hell. It's a beautiful story. It's not a sad story, and we did it on purpose because the Spirit Mentors of Kardec Radio recommended that we see also the brighter side of it, the possibility of continuing life in the afterlife with ease at mind, and the secret to keeping our mental health stable. Let us listen to this, then we can comment more.
An excerpt from Heaven and Hell. Bernardin, Bordeaux, April 1862.
I am a spirit who has been forgotten for many centuries. I lived upon the earth in poverty and disgrace. I toiled unremittingly to earn, each day, a morsel of bread for my family. But I loved him whom I regarded as my veritable master. And when my load of suffering was added to by him whom was my master upon the earth, I used to say, My God, give me the strength to bear up under this load without complaining. I was thus expiating an evil past. But when I came forth from this great trial, my true master received me into his peace. And now my most earnest desire is to say to you all, men, my brethren, whatever price you have to pay for your purification, the happiness that awaits you will amply overpay it. I had no regular trade. I was one of a numerous family of children, and I was at the service of anyone who could help me to get my livelihood. Born at a period in which all servants were hardly and cruelly treated, I endured all the injustice, all the enforced labor, all the grinding and robbing that the subalterns of my owner chose to inflict upon me. I saw my wife outraged, my daughters carried away and then cast off without being able to utter a complaint. I saw my sons torn from me and forced to fight in wars for pillage and for every crime, and hung for faults they had not committed. Ah, friends, if you only knew what I had to endure in that long and wretched life. But I was sustained by the hope of a happiness not of the earth, and my hope was fulfilled. I have a right to say to you, brothers, courage, patience, resignation. My child, preserve what I have written. It is a practical teaching. He who preaches is much more attentively listened to when he can say, I have borne more than you have to bear. I have borne without complaining.
At what period did you live down here?
From 1400 to 1460.
Have you had another earthly existence since then?
Yes, I have lived among you as a missionary of the faith, of the true and pure faith, of the faith that comes from God, not that which men have made for you.
Have you, as a spirit, any occupations?
Can you imagine that spirits remain inactive? Inaction, uselessness, would be torture for them. My mission is to lead the workmen of the great industrial centers to Spiritism. I inspire them with good thoughts and endeavor to neutralize those that backward spirits try to suggest to them.
Here we have it, a case named Bernardin from the book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec. There we have an example of the opposite, of good spirits that come to help us because they know the ins and outs of life. They have lived here. And here he comes also as a way to shield people from, as the last words he said, to protect them from the backward spirits. It's also something that we may observe in the clinical practice and may be also one of the strongest ways to relieve the patient. So now we are going to talk to about the fact that in this therapy, Ona, connecting or attuning with the higher minds, we can probably be more effective in psychotherapy. Can you see one day people absorbing that strategy to be more effective in the clinical practice of psychology, connecting with the guardian angels of the patient and themselves?
I do think that there is a number of psychotherapists, many of them practice as Christian therapists, who try to draw people into a healthier frame of mind. And I don't know specifically if they, what types of work they're actually doing. I know in one of my cases where I have a woman in her early 60s who lost a child when the child was only about 3.5, 4 years old with cancer. That child was creating mischief here. But this mother she denied the child's existence for so many years, had become very obsessive and compulsive and didn't acknowledge the presence of God in her life at all. And the work I've done with her over the last several years, her daughter's presence actually helped her to open back up to reaching out to God, to starting to meditate and pray, and to actually looking for her guardian angel and her higher power, and starting kind of the stumbling road toward belief again, which is very hard for people who've been away for so long, who thought that the materialistic world is all that there is, who've been despairing and hopeless for so long. So they need encouragement and support. And when they have those moments of tremendous peace that their guardian angel or guardian spirit gives them, they need to have someone to reinforce that and recognize that that is a beautiful and powerful thing, and teach them how to continue to seek that it may be given as a gift initially without a lot of work, but that in order to maintain the relationship, you have to open up and you have to communicate and spend time with that in that relationship. And a lot of people, it's not magic. It's not magical thinking. It's not like what people see in Hollywood or on TV. Finding information and guidance and direction either through your church or through a lot of the literature, it just isn't there. But Spiritism does provide guidelines and a frame of reference. I recall reading that we're all very good at imagining what hell is like because we create our own and we're good at it, but we have very little concept of what heaven is like. And I think that teaching people about the positive spirits, about how much they're loved, the people that look out for them, and to listen for that and look for that and hope and pray for it, helps to elevate them and give them hope that there's something more than what they're experiencing in their life. And it helps them then to face their conflicts with much more peace. And that's what I've been seeing in some of the people I've worked with.
Yeah, there's certainly need, and one of the cases that Dr. Wickland talks about as being very difficult as well is about spirit attachment that occurs from spirits that had the drug habits. As he says, it's one of the hardest ones to really overcome because they not only suffer, but they need, after death, to stick around people to keep feeding them from that addiction. And those cravings really are, as he says, are beyond description. And he talks about a very interesting case that he and his wife helped, the case of Minnie Morgan. They had a first conversation with her because he was working at the anatomy class. He was dissecting the body of this lady who actually died of an overdose. And then he talked to her through his wife, Mrs. Wickland. And 25 years later, she comes back, and this is the beauty, because now we're going to talk about the features of spirit release therapy or this obsession, which should be combined with mental health care in some way and form. This spirit comes back 25 years later and says to Dr. Wickland, through his wife as the medium, I feel that I am one with you. Although I don't know you, I was helped by you. I certainly had wonderful help in being brought to understand that there is a real life. In the spirit world, we know each other as we should be known, not as you know each other in earth life with all kinds of hidden thoughts, which is quite interesting because she talks about, as you said at one point in our conversation, the susceptibility that comes in our thoughts. In a previous case in this book, he talks about the suicide of a woman who was very cheerful and joyful and suddenly religious as well. But then she commits suicide, and people are clueless about it because she seemed to be a happy woman, married with children. The husband loved her very much. She loved the children, and people were clueless about it. But in the conversation, through the afterlife experience, then she discloses more about the hidden thoughts, which is not easy to address in therapy because of the mechanisms of defense of the patient, right, Ona?
That's correct.
And in this case, we would say the best approach nowadays to really address the ins and outs of psychic illnesses, as he said, suicide and crime, and all these features, it would be to treat to take care of our mental health, adding the care of the spiritual element inside of us and around. We need to bring greater awareness and probably, like Dr. Wickland, creating partnership between mental health care practitioners, psychiatric hospitals with these obsession groups by spiritist practitioners, or what we call rescue groups, rescue circles, like Dr. Wickland with his wife and others, would be truly effective. I remember, Ona, my great-great-grandfather, who was the first spiritist in our family, they founded one spiritist center almost like 100 years ago in Brazil, which still exists in São Paulo, the state of São Paulo. At a time, much like Dr. Wickland, when psychiatry didn't have prescription drugs, though they don't work 100% effectively, we know, but they had no special places. Psychiatric hospitals were very ineffective in many ways and quite cruel, like in many locations on the earth nowadays. And they had the Spiritist Center. They had the cells to keep the people who were coming from all over Brazil to stay in that very, on the backyard of the Spiritist Center, whereas the Spiritist group would run these obsession meetings, treating the cases one by one, relieving them from the spirit attachment, thanks to the spirits who were guiding the group, and then successfully treating mental disorders in that way and fashion at a time in which medicine couldn't do much. But nowadays, the combination of psychotherapy, some form of prescription drugs, if they are given correctly according to diagnosis, which sometimes is so tricky, and the spiritual therapy, including the passes to relieve the spiritual body of the influence of the spirit attachment, which really causes lots of diseases and imbalance. Do you see that we are closer than ever from getting to this day in which we're going to combine a rescue work, this obsession meeting, in partnership with mental health care in general? Ona, what do you think?
Well, that's an important question, and I think as time goes by, and as people experience these things more and more and form a community, such as the Spiritist societies all across the United States are starting to do, maybe we'll catch up with Brazil. Mm-hmm. But we have such a large degree of materialism in this country that I think it's a huge impediment. And unhappy events such as our current recession and the economic downturns that we have had, I think have helped people to return to more of a spiritual base in their own lives. And I think the doors are opening. I have hope and I pray for it. I just have such a very limited vision because I'm just one person. But since I have spent more time with the Spiritist Society and have read these books, my sense is that a lot is happening right now that we can't see yet. And people have come into my office. It's almost like a magnet where they're just seeking guidance for the opening up of their spiritual psychic lives. And not necessarily people with a lot of problems, just a lot of questions. And it's a large influx, and I don't think I'm the only one experiencing these things. So I think there are changes afoot. I'm very hopeful and excited. All I can do is the work I have presented to me on a day-to-day basis and encourage when I can, what I can. It's a very joyful time for me and a very hopeful time, I think, for the world. The United States, though, I think we got a ways to go because we're so attached to our things and have lost our sense of morality, ethics, and our spirituality.
Yeah, great country, great potential. We just need to help it stay tuned with the purpose of the plan here on Earth. But as you said, these obsession meetings, as we call in Spiritism, or the Spirit Release Therapy, as the Spirit Release Foundation in the United Kingdom talks about, is certainly the way to go. And right now we're still on an individual basis, but sooner than probably we imagine, we're going to gravitate to greater efficacy in treating mental health, because the status of mental care today is really not too efficient, and in general, especially in the most difficult cases, it can be quite distressing, because prescription drugs is basically what people do for the most part. They prescribe. I often say to my students, you don't want to become a medical doctor that is behaving like a technician. You just prescribe drugs. You want to heal the patient. You don't want to, right? You're not a technician. You're a medical doctor. So you should step up to your degree and really go beyond just prescribing drugs, because that's not what it is. Medicine is all about. So the bottom line is we need to do much more than that. And then University of Maryland, the current president of the University of Maryland, quite a visionary, he's boosting something that is quite a new trend for university, the importance of interdisciplinary approach. And probably, Ona, this is the only way out in mental health care, is when we bring together people from different backgrounds, different professions, to work together, and including, in this case, we would say, in the future. Maybe it's far-fetched for us today, but it's probably closer than ever due to the needs of the earth, that we needed to bring in spiritual practices to team up with mental health care, just like we do in Brazil today, to be more efficient. By the way, André Luiz, through Chico Xavier, wrote this book, This Obsession, which is pretty much a great manual that summarizes it gives us an outline of how to put together this rescue circle that Dr. Wickland so-called in his book 30 Years Among the Dead, and we call this obsession meetings in Spiritism. It's not easy. You need a lot of experience, and you need a lot of work. We had a previous show in December with André Cabral from New Jersey that talks about the ins and outs of training yourself to do this, because it's quite a specialization, but it is possible to achieve that level once we know the ins and outs of spirit influence in our lives. So, Ona, we have a question here from Kirsten DeMello. She asked us to relay this question to you, and she says, as a Western psychologist, what was the reaction of your colleagues when you chose an unorthodox treatment, if you disclose it to them? The ones who know about your more unorthodox approach, what do you say, Ona?
I think the question of disclosure is a delicate one, and considering the state of practice down here in Columbus, Georgia, that's not a path I've chosen at this point. Part of it is not to negatively influence people against this type of work. I've become sensitive to when people are ready, whether they want to hear this or not. No, the colleagues down here are very are not very spiritually oriented in their approach, so that's not a direction that I would go. But I have several physicians that I've worked with who are open to this. Actually, when we're done here today, I'm meeting with another physician who I'll be discussing this with. Oddly enough, I'm finding more of an openness in the medical field than in the psychological field. But I'm not surprised, because during my training as a clinical psychologist, Many of the experiences I've had growing up were all explained away as manifestations of the unconscious or the abnormal kind of psychology, which taught me to be very careful so that others don't see me as weak or disabled. So, it's a challenge, but generally what I've found is as I'm talking with people, if they're open to these issues, they will bring it up. I can kind of skirt around the issue and give openings and opportunities, but if they're not open, they just don't go there. I'm working right now to bring another person on board who's an excellent clinician, but she's definitely not ready to deal with this level of perception and practice. But over time, I think she will be. I trust the influence of the higher spirits in bringing people to where they need to be.
Yeah, it's a beautiful approach, as Kirsten DeMello is writing to us right here. She says, bringing sensitive to when people are ready to hear of this great approach. It's really a great approach, and there is hope that we are going to get there. One thing is for sure, for people who are experiencing great need in that regard, we still have a long way to go, and we have to do more in a collective way. As you said, Ona, I think one of the main highlights, we heal together. Cynthia Fabretti quoted what you said here at Blog Talk Radio, and that's true. We all heal together, and I think that's probably the main message. Would you like to share anything else with our listener today?
Well, I really have enjoyed this opportunity because I do very much want to talk more open and more publicly about these wonderful tools that the spirits are providing us, because I'm very committed to seeing people heal and live healthy lives. And this has just been an opportunity for me to take that next step. And I've really enjoyed this very much. And I thank you, Vanessa, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ona. We hope this is just one more step into our beautiful collaboration, and we commend you for stepping up and helping us here at Kardec Radio understand more about the ins and outs of the clinical practice in psychology and how much the spiritual element is something that needs to be brought to consideration to be more efficient. Thank you so much. Big hug to you and to Rolf. We'll be in touch with you.
Big hug back.
Thank you. So, dear listener, let us wrap up this conversation about our dear Dr. Wickland as well, thanking him from the beyond, because he and his wife did a beautiful work. It's so inspirational. Husband and wife working together. He was so open-minded, and at a time in which there wasn't much out there to relieve the spirits, to bring this obsession. He was at the forefront of it all, and I'd like to share with you at the conclusion of this book, 30 Years Among the Dead, he's really a visionary. And he says, and I quote from chapter 17 at his conclusion, demonstrative evidence clearly indicates that much which now seems mysterious can be brought to light by appropriate research. The supernatural is only the natural, not yet understood. Psychical research should be placed on a scientific basis and made safe and sane by eliminating the dwellers on the threshold of the unseen, who through deception and falsehood frequently pervert the truth which the enlightened spirit intelligences are constantly endeavoring to convey to humanity. Advanced intelligences on the invisible side continually urge that broad-minded investigators on the physical plane cooperate with them in establishing research centers in asylums, churches, universities, and other institutions. So, dear listener, here's the recommendation for us. When he says research, he's talking about the opportunity of opening up this partnership with people who are working there with mental health care patients. Hopefully, in this country, spiritist centers will be able to do partnership, safe and effective partnership with mental care practitioners dealing with the spiritual element in these obsession meetings, just like Dr. Carl Wickland did. Allan Kardec, the vanguard of humanity, telling us that there is much more to life than the eyes of the physical body can see. And when we consider that, we'll be much healthier, a better society, a more civilized one, and the future generations will be here much happier as well. Stay there because we're not done. We have a lot more. We have beautiful segments by Kardec Radio's team. If you still have questions, we're here. Comments for you to nourish your soul. After the break, Coping, Spiritism, and Reincarnation with Dr. Marco Magalhães and Joyce Magalhães.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Enjoy this new release. Reborn for Love, by the renowned Brazilian scientist and researcher on reincarnation, Dr. Hernani Andrade. This novel describes one of the most extraordinary and genuine cases of reincarnation ever studied by Dr. Andrade's Brazilian Institute of Psychobiophysics Research in Sao Paulo State. Order your copy now at roundtable.uk@gmail.com or at www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Want to find a good way to explain life after physical death to kids or teenagers? Check out the book Message from a Teen in the Spirit World by the Spirit Neo Lucio and Psychograph by Chico Xavier. In this book, a teenager named Carlos explains his impressions on the new life in the spirit realm with his discarnate relatives and new friends. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
The Spiritist Magazine is a trimestral digital periodical that publishes the latest news on the Spiritist thought and the movement in the USA and worldwide. Subscribe now at www.spiritistmagazine.com.
In the book, A Primer on Being Good by the Spirit May May, psychographed by the medium Chico Xavier, explains in simple language appropriate for children two paths in life, the path of good or the path of evil. God has granted us the freedom to choose either one. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
Now we return to our program.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listener. This is Marco Magalhães, and welcome to our segment, Spiritism in Your Life. Very often in our daily lives, we're faced with difficult times, difficult situations. Even though we think that we're doing our best to improve ourselves, to evolve, and we're working so hard to achieve our goals, sometimes they simply don't come. There are frustrations, there are difficulties in our family, in our work, our material needs, and so many other things. So considering that scenario, most of us will get into a stage of despair and we will not accept what we're going through. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how Spiritism helps us cope. We're going to discuss the effects of reincarnation in our ability to accept and to cope with difficulties. We can find in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 5, item number 3, the justice of afflictions, that the compensations that Jesus promised to the afflicted of the earth cannot occur except in the future life. Without certainty about the future, these maxims will be nonsense. Even more, they would be a falsehood. Continue on item 13. It is said that humans can either soften or increase the bitterness of their trials according to the manner in which they view earthly life. Their suffering is greater if they consider its duration to be long. Consequently, those who look at things from the standpoint of the spirit life understand corporeal existence at a glance. They see it as a dot in the infinite. They grasp its brevity, and they tell themselves that this painful moment will soon be over. The certainty of a happier future that is not far off sustains and encourages them, and instead of complaining, they thank heaven for the pains that enable them to evolve. As we can see, my dear friends, in these two passages from the Gospel according to Spiritism, that believing in a future life and looking at our current difficulties from the standpoint of the spiritual life makes everything easier, makes all the trials less bitter, smaller, and easier to overcome. And you can certainly understand why believing in Spiritism and reincarnation can help you soften the burden of your daily difficulties. But not only in the Gospel we can find this affirmative. In a recent study by Flannelly et al. From 2006, it was shown that the belief in life after death in a nationwide sample of 1,403 Americans was associated with less severe levels of 6 sets of symptoms, including anxiety, depression, compulsion, paranoia, phobia, and somatization. And that same study showed that this belief also has a positive influence in the quality of life. So now we can combine the teachings in the Gospel with our current scientific research to show you that believing in life after death and reincarnation and understanding that we are immortal spirits can dramatically improve our quality of life and also improves our ability to cope. But coping also implies accepting. To summarize our message today, we'll bring a few items that are important to think about when you're going through a difficult situation. Number 1, you should try to understand the situation from a spirit standpoint of view. Consider yourself an immortal spirit destined to perfection, and you see that automatically everything that's going on around you is going to turn smaller and smaller, because that's just a little fraction of your learning curve, and you have to go through many of these difficult situations in order to understand the reality of things. Number 2, remember, vicissitudes of the life have a cause, and since God is just, that cause must also be just, as it's written in the Gospel according to Spiritism. There's always a reason for what's happening to you, and believe me, God, in all His mercy, gave you that chance and evolve. Number 3, do not focus only in your problem or frustrations. Open your mind and your eyes, and you'll see there's a lot more than that. And number 4, reconnect yourself to God. Pray, meditate. God is always sending good energies, and a lot of spiritual friends are around us trying to help us. So if you take the time to ask for help and put yourself in a position of receiving help, everything's going to get better, and you will definitely come out of that situation stronger. Dear listeners, as we come to the end of our segment, we want to thank you all, and remember that an optimistic heart is a medical prescription for peace and happiness. God bless us all.
This segment today, dear listener, is just an introduction of a short journey through item 4 of the introduction of the Gospel according to Spiritism. It's entitled Socrates and Plato, the Forerunners of the Christian Idea and Spiritism. Do you know, my friend, that when Allan Kardec was a teenager, he studied at a then renowned school in Switzerland called Yverdon. that school had to live through hard moments because of religious combat in it. And one of the main reasons for that was the rivalry between Catholic and Protestant teachers and students. This made Kardec and his master Pestalozzi very sad, and although still at the age of 15, Kardec's ideal of a set of principles that could unite all religions by means of a knowledge that could clarify the pathways for the moral principles and fraternity above all was already unfolding within his heart. So do not get surprised at Kardec's text on Socrates, Plato, and its similarities with Spiritism and Christianity, because this was one of the goals he had in his heart since he was a teenager, gathering all the knowledge that humanity has produced in order to make fraternity happen above all. Kardec writes, quote, Socrates, like Christ, wrote nothing himself, or at least left nothing written. Like Christ, he also suffered the death of a criminal, victim of fanaticism, because he had dared to attack existing beliefs, and for having put virtue above hypocrisy and the image of form, in other words, for having combated religious prejudice. In the same manner as Jesus, whom the Pharisees accused of corrupting the people by his teaching, Socrates was also accused by the Pharisees of his time, seeing that they have always existed in all epochs, for proclaiming the dogma of the unity of God, the immortality of the soul, and the future life. Just as the doctrine of Jesus became known only through the writings of his disciples, so the doctrine of Socrates became known through his disciple Plato. For these reasons, we judged it appropriate to offer a brief summary of the most prominent points of Socrates' teachings in order to show the concordance with the Christian principles. To those who consider this parallel a profanity, claiming there can be no similarity between pagan doctrine and that of Christ, we would say that the teachings of Socrates were not pagan, because he objectively combated paganism. As to the teachings of Jesus, which are more complete and pure, they have nothing to lose by this comparison, as it is impossible to diminish the greatness of Christ's divine mission, and that for the rest, we are dealing with a historical fact which no one can obliterate. Man has now reached the point when the light emerges from beneath the bushel of its own accord, because he has reached sufficient maturity to be able to meet truth face to face. And it will be the worst for those who do not wish to see this. The time has arrived to consider matters in a more ample and evolved manner, not from the point of view of narrow and diffident interests of sects and castes. Moreover, these citations will prove that if Socrates and Plato presented Christian ideas, they also gave us the fundamental principles of Spiritism in their writings. Well, dear listener, as we started approaching in our last segment, my friend, we can say that it is interesting to realize that we have three peoples that historically were very involved with one another: the Romans, the Greek, and the Jews. Put it in a very simple way, the Romans came up with their practical approach in life. The Greek brought us their philosophical thoughts, and the Jews, a people that held up a great zest for religious faith. The spirits in charge of bringing us Spiritism usually point to the need of the three aspects of the principles under our consideration: science, philosophy, and religion. In fact, everything that we conceive in life can be seen through these three aspects: scientific, philosophical, and religious. When Kardec points out the life and doctrine of Socrates and compares it to Christianity and Spiritism, one of the things he is trying to show us is that although Jesus Christ was able to uphold science, philosophy, and religion in himself, as a master he was born under those who had the religious approach at its best. But it did not mean that some aspects of the truth and spiritualism could not be also present in other cultures. That may be if Christianity had chosen Plato to Aristotle, we could have had more chance to understand the pathways of consciousness and the spiritual life. The Apostle Paul didn't fail to outstand these great barriers that separated Jesus' moral principles from the biased religious belief of some Jews or from the many times proud and arrogant reasoning of the Greek. He says this in the first epistle for the Corinthians, chapter 1, verse 23. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. Today we just posted this small introduction, but we ask you to stick with us in the last segment because we are going to tackle important points chosen by Kardec while highlighting Socrates, Christianity, and Spiritism. Thank you so much.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Would you like to liberate yourself from your life struggles or to find inner balance? The Inner Journey CD has 3 beautiful visualizations that will help you bring harmony to your life. As Joanna D'Angeli tells us to, live in a way that you leave enlightening footprints in your pathway as if they were stars pointing out the pathway to happiness. To find this CD, go to the bookstore on the Spiritist Society of Baltimore webpage, www.ssbaltimore.org. That is www.ssbaltimore.org, and start your inner journey today.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
And now we return to our program.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listeners, and welcome back to the Spiritist Moment. I am Kirsten DeMello, your host. We are continuing to study the Part 3 of the Spirit's Book, Divine/Natural Laws. We're actually on the Law of Preservation subcategory entitled the Self-Preservation. And before we get into it today, we want to remind ourselves what the spirits tell us about these divine natural laws. And they tell us that the natural laws of God is the only law which is necessary for our happiness. And the only time we find ourselves in unhappy situations is when we stray from these laws. So when we discuss these topics, when we share with one another, it actually is for our own happiness as well. And we are sharing these tools so each one of us can ultimately find this inner peace and this inner happiness with the divine/natural laws of God. This week we are studying questions 704 through 706, and we come to know some what may seem like unnecessary knowledge or common knowledge. The spirits bring to us something very important, and it's an important idea for us to reflect about. They tell us in questions 704 through 706 that firstly, God always provides us with the means of self-preservation by means of the earth. Everything that He has created and that He has produced in this vast universe, specifically in our earth, was created in such a way that would provide for all of our needs. But the spirits also tell us that the only time in life when we find that earth is not producing for us, it's because we have abused her. And they share with us something really interesting. When the topic is brought up about, well, how come at times the earth doesn't always produce enough, the spirits tell us in question 705 the answer. They tell us, look at the nomads in the desert. they always find enough to live on because they do not create imaginary needs. So what does this mean? Sometimes as human beings we create desires and necessities that in actuality we do not need. And this is referenced in other parts of the Spirit's book when the Spirits alert us to the fact that we become beneath the level of an animal when we create such unnecessary needs, because even the animals are able to be stable in that sense. They never overeat or overdo it, only when humans are intervening and sort of mess up their own, we could respectfully call their own internal balance. And the Spirits end very wisely at the end of Answer 705. They state, and we quote, "In truth, I tell you that nature is not stingy. Rather, people do not know how to control themselves." So this is interesting, dear listeners. If we're learning here by the law of preservation, subcategory the means of self-preservation, and the Spirits tell us that we need to be balanced in all that we do, and that when we create these imaginary needs, when we overdo it, when we abuse things, this is contrary to the law, because we do not know how to control ourselves. So we can ask ourselves, are there things in our lives that we have created, perhaps imaginary needs, unnecessary needs? Do we abuse and overdo? Do we have a lack of self-control? Something for us to reflect about. And one of the most common things that come to our minds at this time is at times we find people that perhaps have issues with overeating, or those people who exploit the land and abuse it to such a point where it's difficult for the land to keep producing. And that's when the good noble Spirits tell us in Answer 705 that frequently they blame nature for the consequences of their own incompetence or lack of foresight. The earth would always produce what is needed if humans knew how to be content. So this, dear listeners, is a call for us to be more balanced in our actions from the inside out, for us to reflect about what is truly superfluous and what is truly necessary. We know that according to the literature, we are each given this moral compass of these moral laws within us, so we truly know when enough is enough. But sometimes, as Spirits tell us, we create these imaginary, unnecessary needs. And that's when we need to utilize the power of prayer, inner reflection, and allow ourselves to tune into our mentors and, of course, our Divine Creator to redirect our lives. What happens? Oftentimes we become ill, or we encounter problems or issues in our lives. And this is a call for us to take a step back, reflect, pray, ask for assistance, to reevaluate our lives, because as we started out our broadcast today, we mentioned that the Spirits told us that the natural law of God, the natural laws of God, are the only laws that are truly necessary for human beings to be happy. And the only time that we suffer is when we depart from those laws. Dear friends, let us reflect, meditate, and pray for ourselves and one another. And as always, we wish you many blessings.
The attributes of the divinity. Question number 10. Can human beings fathom God's innermost nature?
No, they lack the aptitude to comprehend it.
Question number 11. Will they ever be able to fathom the mystery of the divinity?
When their spirits are no longer eclipsed by matter, and when they have finally purified themselves enough to be able to approach God, then they will see and comprehend God.
Author's remarks for question number 11. The inferior nature of their faculties makes it impossible for human beings to fathom God's innermost nature. While humanity is in its infancy, people often confuse God with God's creatures, imputing to God their own imperfections. However, they ponder the nature of things more deeply as their moral sense develops, and thus they acquire a truer, though always incomplete, idea of God that conforms more to reason. Question number 12. Even though we cannot fathom God's innermost nature, can we get an idea of some of the divine perfections?
Yes, some of them. Human beings comprehend them better only as they progressively overcome matter, but they can at least get glimpses of them through thought.
Question number 13. When we state that God is eternal, infinite, immutable, immaterial, one, all-powerful, and supremely just and good, don't we have a complete idea of God's attributes?
From your own point of view, yes, because you believe that in so stating them, you therefore have named all of them. Nevertheless, you should understand that there are things that transcend the intelligence of the most intelligent person, things your language cannot define, because it is limited to your ideas and sensations. Your reason tells you that God must be perfect in those attributes to the nth degree, for if God lacked any of them, or was not perfect in them to the nth degree, God would not be superior to everything else, and thus would not be God. In order to be superior to everything else, God must not be subject to any change and must not be imperfect in any way imaginable.
Author's remarks are question number 13. God is eternal. If God had had a beginning, then either God would have had to have sprung from nothing or would have had to have been created by a being that existed previously. Reasoning in this way, we arrive little by little at the idea of eternity and the infinite. God is immutable. If God were subject to change, then the laws that govern the universe would have no stability. God is immaterial. This means that God's nature differs from everything we call matter. Otherwise, God would not be immutable, but would be subject to the transformations of matter. God is one. If there were several gods, then there would be no unity of design or power in the organization of the universe. God is all-powerful because God is one. If God were not powerful above all else, it would mean that there was something more powerful, or at least as powerful. It would mean that God might not have created all things, and those that God did not create would have had to have been the work of some other God. God is supremely just and good. The providential wisdom in the divine laws is revealed in the smallest things as well as in the largest, and this wisdom makes it impossible for us to doubt either God's justice or goodness. Pantheism. Question number 14. Is God a distinct being, or, as some believe, the result of all the combined forces and intelligence of the universe?
If the latter were the case, God per se would not exist, because God would be an effect and not a cause. God cannot be both cause and effect at the same time. You cannot doubt that God exists, and that is the point that matters. Believe me, and do not try to go any farther. Do not get lost in the maze from which you will not be able to exit. Trying to go farther will not make you any better. Instead, it will probably just add to your pride by leading you to imagine that you understand something when you actually understand nothing at all. Therefore, put all theories aside regarding the matter. You have much more important things to be concerned about, beginning with yourselves. Study your own imperfections in order to get rid of them. That will be far more useful to you than trying to penetrate the impenetrable.
Question number 15. What should we think of the opinion holding that all the bodies in nature, all the beings and globes in the universe, are components of the divinity, and taken all together comprise the divinity itself? That is, the pantheistic doctrine.
Since humans are unable to make themselves God, they would like to at least be part of God.
Question number 16. Adherents of this theory claim that it demonstrates some of God's attributes. Since there are an infinite number of worlds, then God is infinite. Since a void or absolute nothingness is nowhere, then God is everywhere. God being everywhere because everything is an integral component of God. God infuses all the phenomena of nature with God's intelligence. What can refute this viewpoint?
Reason. Reflect on it carefully, and you will have no difficulty in seeing how absurd it is.
Author's remarks for question number 16. The pantheistic doctrine views God as a material being who, even though possessed of supreme intelligence, is nevertheless only a larger version of us. Furthermore, since matter is continually changing, then God would have no stability and would be subject to all the changes and all the needs of humanity. God would thus lack one of the essential attributes of the divinity, immutability. The properties of matter cannot be linked to the idea of God without impairing how we think about God, and all the subtleties of sophistry will never be able to solve the issue of God's innermost nature. We do not know all that God is, but we do know what God cannot fail to be. Pantheism contradicts the most essential divine properties by confusing the Creator with the creature. It is like regarding an ingenious machine as being an integral component of the machinist who invented it. God's intelligence is revealed in God's works, just like an artist is revealed in his or her paintings. But God's works are no more actually God than the painting is the artist who conceived and painted it.
Dear listener, what a beautiful show. We hope you have enjoyed, but we're not over. In the last part of the show, we're going to dedicate to the inner. Now it's the inner experience. It's about getting within ourselves, collecting to one another, and to God through prayer. To inspire us even more, music. Music is a great way to uplift our minds, relieve our hearts, and feel the joy of being connected with our Father. And that's actually the song that was put together by our dear friend James Morota, Our Father. Let us listen to this, inspire us, and stay there, because we need you to stay together, pray together, because after all, there is much pain to be relieved in the world, and our prayer can be, even if it's a crumb of light, it's already something, as Mother Teresa would say. Let us listen to the song, Our Father. Dear listener, it's our prayer time. We have discussed about wellness, mental health, and the need to consider the spirit element, which actually is us. We're not an element, but the spirit element in mental health, which is everything. And let us pray today. Let us get together now to pray for all those who are suffering from mental disorders, especially to those who are in psychiatric hospitals, and to those who are caring for them, who also need much inspiration and guidance to lead their lives into the mission of caring for mental health patients. Let us pray now by raising our thoughts, feeling the joy of connecting to our dear Mother, Father, God, loving Creator, kind and blessed Father, Mother of our lives. We have come to understand, to the understanding that there is a law of yours, the law of action and reaction. And we understand that when we come to mental imbalances, dear Father, Mother God, we are no victims. It's the byproduct of our own creation. But we would like to relieve our minds, our souls, with the certainty that your divine providence envelops us with new renewing energies, balanced thoughts, hopeful feelings. May a basket of healing aid energies be brought in to our brothers and sisters who now are experiencing difficult mental imbalances, challenging themselves in their lives with themselves and in their relationships. May these feelings of gratitude to you be multiplied by your abundant love, showering those who are in psychiatric hospitals, discouraged, hopeless, enraged, as well as their spirit companions, the suffering spirits who obsess, looking for revenge. May they receive your sweet invitation to turn their hearts to you and leave to you the justice that we are not fully aware on how it works, but we know you take care of it, not us. May the mental health care practitioners around the world receive our collective wishes of inspiration, of courage, so they can lead their missionary profession to higher levels of efficacy, bringing greater compassion by aligning science with spirituality, and especially with Spiritism. And feeling this love that flows from you to us, would like to thank Dr. Carl Wickland with his wife Anne Wickland for the courage of publishing amazing accounts, suggestions on a most urgent issue for the well-being of humanity on the earth. Thank you, our dear Allan Kardec, who brought us a new vision in life. To Jesus, the loving Master, loving brother, and to you, dear Father, for sending us this opportunity at Kardec Radio, to all those who help this opportunity to come true. May we stay in your inspiration, guiding our lives to greater understanding and to more practical application of all these insights and teachings. And so be it. Dear listener, next week, most beautiful program. We're talking about healing. And Sandra Nunez, who is in California, is going to be here with us, sharing about the most interesting book she wrote about the spiritual surgeries that occur in Brazil, in the Spiritist movement, the spirit doctors that come to relieve the pain of many people who are feeling anguished. A most interesting approach to be considered soon, not only in the United States, but everywhere around the world, because after all, Kardec Radio is more than 61 countries, and our audience is very loving. Thank you for your suggestions and your comments, because very soon we have much more to keep nourishing your soul, because that's the reason why we are here. Many blessings to all of you. Until next week.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.